Welcome, friends, to another At Home with Theosophy. We are exploring the Ancient Wisdom by Annie Besant, some selected chapters from it. And last week we have studied how she describes the physical plane, and that was a more or less basic introduction to the idea of planes of matter. We have seen that there are several planes. There is a chart here, or a table with the different planes, and we are going to refer to that during all these classes. And we have seen also that what we call matter, which Besant called spirit-matter, because every point in matter is also a point in consciousness. So what we call matter is, and consciousness expresses in different ways, forming what in Theosophy is the different planes. So this week we are going to explore the second plane, if we count from below up, which is the astral plane.
Astral plane. The astral plane is the region of the universe next to the physical, if the word next may be permitted in such a connection. The word next is, however, inappropriate as suggesting the idea that the planes of the universe are arranged as concentric circles, one ending where the next begins. Rather, they are concentric, interpenetrating spheres, not separated from each other by distance, but by difference of constitution.
So this is the first misleading aspect of talking about planes and presenting tables as the ones we have here, because it looks like the planes are in a kind of layered reality where one plane is on top of the other. So we are right here in the physical plane, and the astral plane it looks like it's not right here. The astral plane is up there, wherever the physical finishes. So that is not the idea at all. All the planes are right here, and when we draw these kind of tables, the higher plane doesn't mean that it's higher spatially at the level of space, but it's higher in the kind of matter, the energy and the vibration of that kind of matter that we call astral matter, which is beyond what our five senses can perceive. We know this with light, for example. Our five senses, or our eyes, can perceive a particular range of vibration that we call visible light, and whatever is above that at the level of frequency or below that cannot be perceived by our eyes. So same with the astral matter. The astral matter is right here, but our five senses just cannot perceive it.
The astral world is above us, below us, on every side of us, through us. We live and move in it, but it is intangible, invisible, inaudible, imperceptible, because the prison of the physical body shuts us away from it, the physical particles being too gross to be set in vibration by astral matter.
So that is what I just said. The astral matter is right here, but we cannot perceive it with the five senses. Let's see, Ed is raising his hand. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I think the easiest example is the fact that there's Wi-Fi where we're at, there's television waves, there's radio waves, there's cosmic rays, and all of that interpenetrate each other, and yet are separated basically by their frequency. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like this.
Yeah, that's a good example. And it's also like, if you turn on the radio, there are all kinds of stations that you can get, but all the radio waves are right here, but which one you get depends on how you attune your radio to what kind of frequency. So are the different aspects in a human being, as we are going to see, the physical, the astral aspect, the mental aspect. These are all different receptors that respond to different kinds of frequencies, as we are going to see. So yeah, that's a good way to see this.
The spirit matter of that plane is more highly vitalized and finer than any grade of spirit matter in the physical world. The ultimate physical atom, the constituent of the rarest physical ether, has for its sphere wall innumerable aggregations of the coarsest astral matter.
So remember, we saw when analyzing the constitution of physical matter, we saw that there are 7 different states of matter. The last one is the true atom, atom in the sense of whatever is indivisible, and that is the subtlest physical particle, if we want to call it that way. But it is made of the grossest, the densest, the slower of the kinds of astral matter. So whatever is the subtlest in the physical is the densest of the astral matter. So the astral plane itself is as Annie Besant says here, far more subtle and vitalized.
Life on the astral plane is more active than on the physical plane, and form is more plastic. The spirit matter of the astral plane exists in 7 subdivisions, as we have seen in the physical. There, as here, there are numberless combinations forming the astral solids, liquids, gases, and ethers, but most material forms there have a brightness, a translucency, as compared to forms here, which have caused the epithet astral or starry to be applied to them.
So astral comes from the stars, starry, in the sense that is shiny, because the astral matter has this kind of brightness itself. You know, in the physical plane, you need external light to make things bright. On the astral plane, everything has its own brightness, and because the physical matter is so dense, the physical forms are far more stable and solid and unchangeable than they are on the astral plane. On the astral plane, forms are very changeable. At any moment, any form can change. You may have an appearance on the astral plane, but you can change it completely at any moment with very little effort. That's because the matter itself, the astral matter, has a completely different quality. As Annie Besant says here, there is what we could call astral solids. It's not that is solid, it's that is the densest of the kinds of astral matter. She says in the book, we don't have any names for these kind of divisions on the other planes, so she uses the same idea of solid, liquids, and gases allegorically.
The main idea to be grasped is that astral objects are combinations of astral matter, as physical objects are combinations of physical matter, and that the astral world scenery much resembles that of Earth in consequence of its being largely made up of the astral duplicates of physical objects.
So everything in the universe has astral matter just as it has a physical matter. So we can see the physical aspect of a chair, for example, through our physical senses. There are also astral senses that in most people in humanity are still dormant. But if our astral senses were working, you could see the astral chair, meaning the astral matter that is around the physical matter of the physical plane. So if you look on the astral plane, you would see all the same objects as we see them around physically, but you would see the astral counterpart of it. So it is more or less similar, although as we are going to see, some kind of education is necessary, education of your perception, to be able to understand the astral world, because the matter there is different.
One peculiarity, however, arrests and confuses the untrained observer, partly because of the translucency of astral objects, and partly because of the nature of astral vision, consciousness being less hampered by the finer astral matter than when encased in the terrestrial. Everything is transparent. Its back is visible as its front, its inside as its outside.
So things are not so solid, as we said. The idea of matter is impenetrable. It's only true at the physical level. That is an artistic rendition of maybe an astral landscape where you have mountains and sea and the sky, and everything is more or less transparent and confused with each other. So when a person begins to see on the astral plane, it needs some training or gather some experience to be able to understand what he's seeing, which seems to be the same case with the physical side. It is believed in the scientific field that the babies they do have to accustom themselves to interpret what we call our sight. That at the beginning they don't know how to interpret what they are seeing.
Okay, Ed has a question. Are the astral elements the same as physical elements?
By elements, if you refer to the chemical elements, no, the idea is that the chemical elements is one state of physical matter which can be broken down into the subatomic particles, into quarks, into subquarks, as we have seen in the previous class. And then if you break that down, you have astral matter, so you wouldn't have the same elements. He's asking if there is astral gold. I don't think there is astral gold, but what we call gold has some astral, the atom that we call gold has some astral matter around. So you could see the gold from the astral point of view, but if you could separate the astral from the physical, you wouldn't have astral gold in itself. It's a little complicated, but the idea is that there are some astral kind of entities, objects that are purely astral, and then the physical objects, they have an astral counterpart because all the atoms have like all the different planes, but it is the astral counterpart of the physical. So I wouldn't say that there is. Then how does the astral mimic the physical? Just as I said, it's like the atom has like an astral counterpart, but you cannot separate that astral part from the physical. There are some astral elements, if we want to call it that way, but they do not correspond to the physical.
Some experience is needed, therefore, ere objects are correctly seen, and a person who has developed astral vision but has not yet had much experience in its use is apt to receive the most topsy-turvy impressions and to fall into the most astounding blunders.
So, for example, the image you have there is an image that people in mathematics use. That's a cube seen from a fourth dimension, in a 4D. And the astral plane is said to be, or things on the astral plane are seen in a fourth dimension of matter, not so much space. So this is how you would see a cube on the astral plane. You see that it's difficult to realize that is a cube. But with experience, then you start seeing that there is a cube there, and that's how things look. When we talk about all these things, it's difficult to explain them. Besant, Leadbeater, clairvoyants, they say, well, we are trying to explain it in terms of the physical words, but that is only an approximate idea that we can get through a physical description. Then the actual experience with astral matter, for example, will give, of course, a clearer idea.
Another striking and at first bewildering characteristic of the astral world is the swiftness with which forms, especially when unconnected with any terrestrial matrix, change their outlines. An astral entity will change his whole appearance with the most startling rapidity, for astral matter takes the form under every impulse of thought, the life swiftly remolding the form to give itself new expression.
So here you have what Annie Besant says, and she's talking about two kinds of astral objects. One are the forms that are connected, let's say, with the terrestrial matrix. So you have the gold that we were talking about, and there is astral matter around the gold, connected to the gold, following, if the gold is a little statue, you have around that gold astral matter that resemble the shape of the statue. Now, that astral matter is connected to the physical matrix, and that doesn't change. But then you have astral objects that are not connected to the physical, that are pure real astral objects or entities. These, as Annie Besant says here, these astral entities, they can change their appearance at any second.
Elemental essence. As the great life wave of the evolution passes downwards through the astral plane, it constitutes the third elemental kingdom. The elemental essence shows a peculiar vitality and characteristic of responding to and instantly taking shape under the impulse of thought vibrations.
So in antiquity, when talking about the kingdoms of nature, there were 4 kingdoms described: mineral, the vegetable, animal, and human kingdom. And this is good enough from a symbolic point of view. Of course, from the scientific point of view, we organize the kingdoms in a different way because it's based on the cellular kind of structure. From the more esoteric point of view, the kingdoms are classified according to the levels of consciousness. So let's say we have mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. But there are 3 more kingdoms besides these 4 that we are familiar with. They are called elemental kingdoms. These are pre-mineral kingdoms, meaning that as we can think of minerals evolving into plants and then into animals and then into human beings in the process of evolution. First we have inorganic matter developed. That would be like the mineral kingdom. Then that inorganic matter begins to form simple structures, and then the vegetables, and then the animal forms. In that sequence, before the mineral is formed, there are 3 elemental kingdoms which are not physical. So the one that is on the astral plane is called the third elemental kingdom. Then on the higher planes are the other 2. And it's a kind of matter / consciousness. It's as Annie Besant is going to describe, it's a kind of energy that is on the astral plane that can respond to thoughts and to emotions, and that can generate a certain instinctive activity. And we are going to see, Annie Besant explains this a little more.
This elemental essence exists in hundreds of varieties on every subdivision of the astral plane, as though the air became visible here and were in constant undulatory motion with changing colors like mother of pearl.
If you could see how the air is constantly moving and changing, it is said that the elemental essence on the astral plane it's also moving, constantly moving like that, but not following a difference of pressure like in the case of the air. The air moves according to different pressures in different parts of the world, but the origin of all this motion is the emotions and thoughts from people or from sentient beings that are constantly influencing this elemental essence.
Artificial elementals. This vast atmosphere of elemental essence is ever answering to vibrations caused by thoughts, feelings, and desires, and is thrown into commotion by a rush of any of these like bubbles in boiling water.
In certain sense, when you have in Star Wars the idea of the Force, and that you can sense the Force and all these things, it could be equated in some aspects to this. There is this constant moving force, which we call elementals, on the astral plane that is responding to any change of emotions or thoughts or feelings, and they actually take shape under these activities of consciousness, as we are going to see.
The duration of the form depends on the strength of the impulse to which it owes its birth. The clearness of its outline depends on the precision of the thinking, and the color depends on the quality, intellectual, devotional, passional, of the thought. While they maintain a separate existence, they are living entities, with bodies of elemental essence and thoughts as the ensouling lives, and they are then called artificial elementals or thought forms.
So whenever we think, that action of consciousness, thinking is a force that shapes the elemental essence that is around us. So every thought or emotion that we have produces a form outside of ourselves, which is ensouled, so to say, by the thinking that we have produced. So these forms, if the thinking is very clear and precise, the forms are also sharp and clear. If the thinking is vague and confused, so are the forms too. And according to the strength of the thought, not only the precision, but also the strength of this thought, if it is a passing thought or if it is a thought from a mind that is concentrating, will be how long these forms are going to last. And according to the motivation of that thinking or feeling, will be the kind of color. So if you see a thought form, you can judge by the shape, the sharpness, the color, and the strength of it, you can judge what kind of thinking has produced it. Now, these thought forms become what is called artificial elementals. They are like little entities which can have an influence on people outside of ourselves and on ourselves too, as she is going to explain.
Vague, loose thoughts gather around themselves, loose clouds of elemental essence, when they arrive in the astral world, and drift about, attracted hither and thither to other clouds of similar nature, clinging round the astral bodies of persons whose magnetism attracts them, either good or evil, and after a while disintegrating to again form a part of the general atmosphere of elemental essence.
So many of the thoughts produced by us are vague. By us, I mean humanity, and vague feelings of intolerance, or vague feelings of love, or vague feelings of fear, and these produce these kind of clouds that coalesces with other similar clouds, and then they may be attracted to a person. And when one of these clouds is attracted to you, that tends to stimulate that kind of feeling in yourself. So for no reason, suddenly you have a certain feeling. You feel certain fear, or you feel certain joy, or you feel some kind of intolerance. Many times it's just that you are attracting that cloud is attracted to you, and then when that feeling appears, what the mind always does is to try to give shape to it, to find an explanation for it. So many times it happens that you have a vague sense of fear, and the mind immediately recalls something in your life that can justify that sense of fear. So you put an explanation, you put this idea or the memory of something that you are afraid of, which was actually stimulated by an external feeling that we just take ownership of, and then once the mind is there, we begin to stimulate, we begin to sustain that fear or love or whatever feeling. So it is important to begin to look at ourselves, develop a sense of self-observation, and see many times there are feelings that you say, I don't want to take ownership of this, so you can just let it go if you are aware of it.
Clear, precise thoughts have each their own definite shapes, with sharp, clean outlines, and show an endless variety of designs. They are shaped by vibrations set up by thought, just as on the physical plane we find figures which are shaped by vibrations set up by sound. Voice figures offer a very fair analogy for thought figures for nature. With all her infinite variety, is very conservative of principles, and reproduces the same methods of working on plane after plane in her realms.
These images that are down there are these so-called voice figures. If you look this up in YouTube, for example, you will see some videos with this. You can make different kinds of sound go through, some kind of fabric or it is a special material, and you put sand, for example, or powder on top of it, and you will see how different vibrations, sound vibrations, will produce all these different shapes. And Annie Besant says something similar happens with the thought forms. A particular thought can produce even these kind of geometrical figures, which a person that is clairvoyant can see, all these geometrical figures around us.
These clearly defined artificial elementals have a longer and much more active life than their cloudy brethren, exercising a far stronger influence on the astral bodies, and through them on the minds, of those to whom they are attracted. They set up in them vibrations similar to their own, and thus thoughts spread from mind to mind without terrestrial expression. More than this, they can be directed by the thinker towards any person he desires to reach, their potency depending on the strength of his will and the intensity of his mental power.
So for these special shapes to be formed, the thought has to be accurate and clear and sharp, and that also you can see in that happens with the voice figures or the sound figures. There are certain precise frequencies that generate a particular shape. Now, when we think and we produce this kind of clear thought forms, those thought forms are shot, so to say, at the object of our thought. So we can think and send good thoughts to some person, to a place, to a situation, and those thought forms will be directed toward that person or place or situation. The same happens with bad thoughts. They are also shot at their aim.
Ed asks, did Blavatsky talk about thought forms?
Yes, she did, more under the idea of elementals. She would say you can send elementals, because the elementals are like the shape of the thought form or the matter aspect, and the thought itself is the ensouling energy. And there is in particular one of the Mahatma letters where the master explains all this quite in detail, how we generate these artificial elementals and everything we are talking about. That in the letter, I think it's the letter that the first letter he wrote to Hume, which in the Mahatma letters, the edition is in one of the appendix. There is a very quite detailed explanation of all this.
Among average people, the artificial elementals created by feeling or desire are more vigorous and more definite than those created by thought. Thus, an outburst of anger will cause a very definitely outlined and powerful flash of red, and sustained anger will make a dangerous elemental red in color and pointed, barbed, or otherwise qualified to injure. So she says in average people, because at this point in our evolution, emotions are still a far stronger seat of consciousness than thinking. In most people, emotions produce a thought form or an emotional form, so to say, stronger than the thinking. You know, if in a situation there is a conflict between what you feel and what you think you should do, in most people what they feel win. That's just what we were saying. It's because emotions are still stronger than reasoning. But in people who start trying to lead a spiritual life, thinking begins to be stronger than the emotions. And you can see in that image is a rendition
an artistic rendition of what Annie Besant and Leadbeater saw in their researches. So this is how this elemental of anger sometimes can be seen.
Love, according to its quality, will set up forms more or less beautiful in color and design, all shades of crimson to the most exquisite and soft hues of rose, like the palest blushes of sunset or the dawn, clouds of tenderly strong protective shapes. Many a mother's loving prayers go to hover around her son as angel forms, turning aside from him evil influences that perchance his own thoughts are attracting.
So many times love can be a shield. This reminds me, since we are quoting movies, the idea of Harry Potter, if you know how he was protected by the love of his mother. So the idea is that on the astral plane, our love produces a kind of protection that tends to reject negative thoughts and emotions and attract the positive ones. Of course, how protective this shield can be depends on many things, on the ability of the person to feel real love, in the strength of that love, in the strength of the consciousness of that person. And so the effect of all these things depend on how evolved the person is, if we want to put it that way.
It is characteristic of these artificial elementals, when they are directed by the will towards any particular person, that they are animated by the one impulse of carrying out the will of their creator. A protective elemental will hover around its object, seeking any opportunity of warding off evil or attracting good, not consciously, but by a blind impulse, as finding there the line of least resistance. So also an elemental ensouled by a malignant thought will hover around its victim, seeking opportunity to injure.
So these elementals are, these artificial elementals, while they are alive, they act as an entity. They, if you can see them, they move around, they try to produce the goal for which they were created. So creating elementals is an act of unconscious magic in a certain sense. I mean, if they are created unconsciously, as with most people. Now, that intelligence is given to the elemental by the person who created the elemental. And there are many stories in traditions and in myths of these kind of entities that can be created by will. So they act, as Besant says, they are not really consciously, they have a blind impulse, but there is a kind of intelligence in them.
But neither of them can make any impression unless there be in the astral body of the object something akin to themselves that can answer accordingly to their vibrations. If there be nothing in him of matter cognate to their own, then by a law of their nature they rebound from him along the magnetic trace they have left and rush to their creator with a force proportionate to that of their projection. Thus a thought of deadly hatred, failing to strike the object at which it was darted, has been known to slay its sender, while good thoughts sent to the unworthy return as blessings to him that poured them forth.
People who are interested in the field of magic and all that, which in the Theosophical view it's always said, don't try to manipulate these forces, because then you open up yourself to a whole world that you don't know how the laws of this world. But there are those who are interested in all this, and they are many times they are concerned about protection, how they can protect themselves from these things, and they try to devise rituals or tricks, but the real protection is always to try to keep our mind and our emotions in positive states. If we are not having negative emotions, there are no negative thought forms that can affect you. So you may have a negative thought form around you, and the way that manifests in you is you see this emotion trying to be generated inside of you. If you are not aware, you will identify with that emotion. As I said, you will generate a story around that emotion, why you feel that. And then by that, you are taking ownership of it and you are making it stronger. But if we start living with more awareness and having a sense that our field of consciousness is maybe like a sacred temple, where we can say what kind of visitors we let into the field of consciousness. So if we are aware and we see these negative emotions, we don't need to be afraid, we don't need to do anything. Just be aware of it and don't get entangled in that emotion. And therefore what happens is that the thought form bounces off yourself because you are not opening the door. And this state of awareness and trying to keep your mind from getting entangled in negativity is the best protection. And as Annie Besant explains there is this karmic result that if the thought form doesn't find any receptivity, it bounces off to whoever sent it. So whether that thought form is good or ill. So the idea is that it is important to begin to generate this state of self-observation and to have an active role in when we see the negative emotions, simply do not engage in them and let them, just bounce off.
If we take artificial elementals in the mass, it is easy to realize the tremendous effect they have in producing national and race feelings, and thus in biasing and prejudicing the mind. We all grow up surrounded by an atmosphere crowded with elementals embodying certain ideas, national prejudice, and the ways of looking at all questions, which play on us from our birth. We see everything through this atmosphere. As most people are receptive rather than initiative in their nature, they act almost as automatic reproducers of the thoughts which reach them, and thus the national atmosphere is continually intensified.
So that's, if you travel, that's something that you can notice many times, how countries have their own way of looking at certain things that they seem strange to you if you are not from that country, because there is this national atmosphere that is generated by this constant production of thought forms in that particular way. So in some countries, a particular kind of political or approach, maybe everybody thinks that is good, and in a different country everybody thinks that is wrong. And if you actually ask the individuals, very few of them have a rational reason why they think in a particular way. That's the way things are. They always thought that way because of what Annie Besant says here. Most people, they just feel or unconsciously take on this thinking and they just reproduce it. So even in our own life also, it's important, part of the spiritual growth implies questioning why we think in the way we do, why we have certain judgments, why we have certain ideas. You will see that if you really see, why do I think this? Have I ever examined this particular subject, and have I come to a conclusion, to a view that may be wrong or may be right, but is a view that I actively explored, or most of my views are just absorbed from the environment. So this is important in the spiritual path, but because many of us have all these ideas that are actually being put into ourselves from the outside, from the astral plane or the mental plane.
When a person is beginning to be sensitive to astral influences, he will occasionally find himself suddenly overpowered or assailed by a quite inexplicable and seemingly irrational dread, which swoops upon him with even paralyzing force. This arises partly from a certain hostility which animates the natural elemental world against the human, on account of the various destructive agencies devised by him, but is also largely due to the presence of so many artificial elementals of an unfriendly kind bred by human minds.
So you see, for example, since we all feel, we all think, on the astral plane, every thought and every feeling is put out there. Something that happened with the internet, for example, in this time, is that anybody can post his or her opinion. Before, very few people could write books, very few people could, speak in the radio or TV. And now everybody can put out there their thoughts and emotions. And if you see, and you can see that online many times, we tend to go to negative feelings and negative thoughts in general in humanity. If you see in people how much or many positive thoughts and emotions generate in the day and how many negative, in most cases, I would say, just talking generally, that there is a tendency for the negative thoughts, feelings of intolerance or selfishness or greed or desire or aggression are unfortunately at this point in evolution far more common than feelings of love and compassion and trying to help. So the astral atmosphere around us tends to be more negative than positive. So when a person begins to be more sensitive to the astral atmosphere, normally there is an increase in this perception of fear and anger and all these things that begin to like knock at the door of consciousness. This is why not being able to perceive on the astral plane is a protection that nature gives us until we reach a state of consciousness in which we can remain with equanimity regardless of what kind of thoughts or emotions are coming from the outside. If we don't develop that state of equanimity, then the more sensitive we are, the more we fall prey of these astral influences, which, as we see, the majority of them tend to be negative. And also, as Annie Besant says there, when in the world we destroy the environment, we kill animals, we oppress other creatures, and all this generates in the natural world a kind of reaction against humanity. So the elementals that are on the astral plane, they for the most part are kind of hostile to human beings because they see us as a destructive force. So many times when a person begins to awaken to the astral plane, the first thing that happens is that the elementals recognize that this person can perceive them, and they try to go and scare the person or attack the person. This is also why in many esoteric traditions there is a kind, sometimes a ceremony or some kind of act in which this person is introduced to the elementals so that the elementals are not hostile to the person. It comes from this particular fact of the occult world.
Natural elementals and nature spirits. Outside the class of artificial elementals, the astral world is thickly populated. There are great hosts of natural elementals or nature spirits, divided into 5 main classes: the elementals of the ether, fire, air, water, and earth. The last 4 groups have been termed in medieval occultism the salamanders, sylphs, undines, and gnomes. These are the creatures of the elements, carrying on the activities connected with them. They are channels through which work the divine energies, the living expressions of the laws. So far we have seen the artificial elementals, the one we generate with our thoughts and emotions. Now there are natural elementals, which are the energies of the elements.
again, not here the elements as the chemical elements, but the classical elements, earth, fire, air, and water, which are the physical manifestation of these non-physical forces. So what is called the salamanders, for example, is the elemental energy and consciousness and the elemental spirit, if we want to put it that way, of fire. In magic, for example, these elementals are manipulated to have an effect on the physical element. So, for example, if you know how to manipulate the salamanders, then you know how to manipulate fire. You can start a fire, or you can protect yourself from fire. Same with the seals, which is from air, or the undines, or the gnomes. So, of course, all this information is normally kept secret by those who guard the esoteric knowledge, because if we as humanity learn how to manipulate all this, the first thing we would use it for is in warfare, just as we did with the atomic bomb or anything we discover. So how to manipulate the elementals and even the existence of the elementals is normally kept secret, and all this unbelief by the scientific world about all these things is actually a protection. If scientists really believed that these things exist, they would set themselves on trying to learn how to manipulate them. So all this disbelief is also a kind of protection. And the idea is that any law, any motion we see around is the physical effect of some movement of intelligence which comes from the elementals, the natural elementals. And these natural elementals are in turn the builders or the forces that are directed by higher celestial beings, which in religions are called angels or devas. We are going to see all this in next classes.
By understanding the nature of these, or knowing the methods of their control, the so-called miracles of magical feats are worked, which from time to time are recorded in the public press, as in the case of the late Mr. Home, who could unconcernedly pick a red-hot coal out of a blazing fire with his fingers and hold it in his hand unhurt. Levitation and walking on the water have been done by the aid, respectively, of the elementals of the air and water, although another method is more often employed.
Yeah, normally the method that is employed is to reverse the polarity of gravity, and that's how these things normally happen when people produce this levitation or walking on water, but they could also be produced by manipulating the elementals.
We find also on the astral plane nature spirits, less accurately termed elementals, who are concerned with the building of forms in the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human kingdoms. There are nature spirits who build up minerals, who guide the vital energies in plants, and who form the bodies of the animal kingdom. These are the fairies and elves of legends, the little people, who play so large a part in the folklore of every nation, the charming, irresponsible children of nature.
So this is another kind of elementals, which so we have the artificial elementals created by conscious beings, by us. We have the natural elementals, which are the spirit and the forces behind the elements. And then there are these nature spirits, which sometimes are said to be elementals, but they are their own kind of kingdom. And the nature spirits are builders of forms. So when in science, for example, there is no explanation as to why cells arrange themselves in a particular form. If in the lab you try to cultivate cells, they always grow as a sheet, but in nature they grow with different forms. So scientists don't know how that happened. Now that happens by the manipulation of the etheric part of the physical plane by these elementals, these nature spirits. So the idea is that the nature spirits help to shape the world that we see around. In nature, ourselves, they are the givers of, or the ones that guide the generation of forms. And these are what are, as Annie Besant says, they are the fairies, or in different mythologies they have different names. Another aspect of that we find on the astral plane, we have seen on the astral plane, we have the astral counterpart of objects. We have astral entities, which we haven't talked much about it, but we will later. And we have elementals, or all these different kinds, which are astral entities. These are part of the kinds of astral entities you can see around. And now another thing you see on the astral plane, or you find, are astral bodies. So we will see that.
The mineral monad, exercising his organizing power, draws in materials from the astral world, and these are built by the nature spirits into a loosely constituted mass, the mineral astral body. In the vegetable world, the astral bodies are a little more organized, and their special characteristic of feeling begins to appear. Dull and diffuse sensations of well-being and discomfort are observable in most plants as the results of the increasing activity of the astral body.
So the astral body and the astral plane is a plane of sensations. So in the minerals, for example, here we have again the idea that we have been discussing. The monad is like the divine spark that begins evolution. So the monad that is animating the mineral kingdom begins to draw material from the astral world, and the nature spirits generate a kind of loose astral cloud around the mineral. So if you have a piece of gold, as we were talking about, you will have a loose cloud of astral matter around the gold, with no particular form, because at the level of the mineral kingdom, it is just this loosely constituted mass, as Annie Besant says there. Then the vegetable kingdom, in this kingdom of nature, the astral body of the plants, or any vegetable, begins to be more organized. Therefore, because it is more organized, there is the beginning of feelings that are possible in plants. Plants feel the sun, where the sun is coming from, and they can move in that direction slightly. They can feel, even there are some experiments where it seems that the plants can feel the general emotional atmosphere around. And anybody that loves plants, they know that if they give love to the plants seem to do better than, if they don't. So in the vegetable kingdom, what we call feeling, this activity of consciousness that we call feeling, begins to be possible because the astral body, which is the one that translates the activity of consciousness into feelings, is more organized in plants than in minerals.
In the animal kingdom, the astral body is more developed, reaching in the higher members of that kingdom a sufficiently definite organization to cohere for some time after the death of the physical body, and to lead an independent existence on the astral plane. In civilized countries, these animal astral bodies add much to the general feeling of hostility which was spoken of above, for the organized butchery of animals in slaughterhouses and by sport sends millions of those annually into the astral world, full of horror, terror, and shrinking from men.
So in the animal kingdom, the astral body is very well developed. Therefore, we have very clear feelings and emotions, and animals can feel pain and pleasure and hate and love in a not so intellectual way as we do, but they are developing the ability to feel more and more precise feelings, and that is possible because the astral body of the animal is well organized. According to Annie Besant, the presence of the nervous system at the level of the physical body is a sign that the astral body is well developed. So the effect of the developing of an organized astral body on the physical plane is the development of a complex nervous system. This is why, for example, the animal kingdom, and especially the higher exemplars of the animal kingdom, pets or elephants or dolphins, as opposed to insects. Insects are still part of the animal kingdom, but if you see their nervous system is completely different at the level of the complexity. That responds to how developed the astral body is in these different animals, and therefore how much pain or pleasure they can feel. This is a guide, or could be a guide, for the animal right movements. The more developed the nervous system is, the more the animal, in this case, would feel pain or pleasure or other feelings. So that's how you in your life also can sometimes. People, out of compassion for animals, they decide to be vegetarian, and then somebody else would say, well, you are also killing a plant if you eat a plant, and of course you are, but at the level of causing pain or pleasure, a plant has a less ability to feel pain or pleasure than an animal does, from an occult point of view in this sense. Also, because the astral body is more coherent, when the animal dies, there is a certain life of that animal on the astral plane, because the astral plane can be a vehicle of consciousness for a certain period of time. And Annie Besant says that all these astral, the astral body of all these animals that have been killed and that go to the astral plane in this state of fear or anguish or anger because they are being killed, all those astral bodies react on the emotional atmosphere of humanity, because we all share the same astral plane. So if we are sending to the astral plane all these astral bodies of animals in this state of suffering, then that comes back to us, to our culture, in acts of violence, in feelings of depression, feelings of anger. We are just sending out their suffering. So this is part of what Annie Besant, actually, in one book, she says in the early 20th century, she was coming to Chicago, and suddenly she started feeling all this sadness, and she couldn't understand why. It was obvious that it wasn't something she was producing. And then when she came to Chicago, this was the first time she came. It seems that at the time Chicago was famous for the slaughterhouses, and she realized that there was all this sad atmosphere around. Of course, she was very sensitive to the astral plane because of the slaughterhouses that were so prominent in Chicago.
The nature spirits concerned with the building of the animal and human astral bodies are called desire elementals, because they are strongly animated by desires of all kinds and constantly build themselves into the astral bodies of animals and men. They use the varieties of elemental essence to construct the astral bodies of animals, those bodies acquiring the centers of sensation and of the various passional activities.
So these elementals that we said, they build forms, they actually are grafted into our own body. So we have an astral body that is built on the astral matter that is there in the astral plane available, but also the elementals, which are called the desire elementals, these emotional forces, let's say, that build our body, they are also the energy that animates our astral body. Just like our physical body is made of cells, and the cells are alive, and the cells have their own life, and if the cells decide to reproduce themselves without any restraint, we have a cancer, and that's something that is an activity of the cells themselves, not necessarily of ourselves as an organism. In the same way, our astral body has its own energy, its own consciousness, its own activity, which comes from the desire elementals that build our body. Now, we can attract, according to the kind of emotions we have, let's say, purer or less pure desire elementals. By that we mean desire elementals that thrive in negative emotions or those that thrive in positive emotions. According to what kind of activity in our consciousness, emotional activity we normally have, is the kind of elementals we attract. So same as with the physical body. If we eat bad food, we generate an unhealthy physical body. If we eat bad emotions or are constantly feeding ourselves with bad emotions, we generate an unhealthy astral body. We are going to see all this in detail in our next class. It will be mainly about the human astral body and how it is constituted. But this is the foundation of why it is so important to keep an eye on our thoughts and emotions from an esoteric point of view. So this is it for today. This is the first part of the chapter on the astral plane. So next week we are going to continue with it. Now, is there any question or comment that anyone wants to make? It can be either using your mic or through the chat box.
I'm interested to know what, when we've man-made elements, is it also then infused with our thoughts, human thoughts, or, what forms that astral matter?
What,
when it's
what do you mean
man-made?
by elements?
Like
what?
chemical, the table of elements, those elements.
There are a few artificial elements that we have generated, not too many. And I suppose that when we generate the physical elements, we also attract the astral matter that is associated with the physical matter. Now, Dora Kunz did some research on this, and she saw that, for example, crystals that are artificial, that are man-made, tend to have less energy around than the natural crystals. I suppose that one of the reasons is because in nature things develop in a very slow way, for a long time. So there is time to build into it all these elemental forces. When we generate something artificially, it's normally generated very fast. So probably we don't give time for the whole process to happen. But then as time passes, we can charge objects with our thoughts and emotions. So some objects may become talismans. If there is an object to which we normally direct our attention and we infuse any kind of feeling or thought, that object becomes a source of that kind of feeling. So if you go to churches, you tend to feel the peace in the church. If it is an old church that has been the repository of these feelings for a long time. If you go to a new church, newly built, it's just like a lecture hall. You don't feel anything in particular. So in time, things can be charged, either naturally or artificially by human activity. So maybe for this week, I'm not sending practical exercises after the classes, but since we are talking about emotions and feelings, if you want to practice something this week, try to keep an eye on the emotions that come to you and pay attention to see if those emotions are produced by your own thinking, if they are produced by an external situation, or if they just come from within and then you build a story around. Try to see if you can differentiate the origin of the emotions. And in any case, whatever the origin is, try to see how much you can remain unentangled with the negative emotions. You can feel them, you can recognize them. It's not that you have to repress them, but just recognize them as an activity of consciousness that you don't want to take ownership of. So do that, and that whenever we practice something, then we can understand it far deeper than when we read a book or listen to a lecture, because we are actually beginning to see by first-hand knowledge some aspects of what we discuss. So if you feel inclined, do that exercise and begin to work on this path of self-knowledge.